Okay, for the next installment, we have Daniel Roberts, our estate planning attorney. I personally do not have an estate planning attorney. I kind of have an idea of what they do based on, being in residential real estate and all. But Daniel, I'm really happy that you're able to join us today and kind of break down what you do during that process. So we appreciate having you.
Yeah, great to be here. Great to see you, Nima. Ed, always a pleasure.
We got my co-host Ed Diaz as well here, and Ed being the mortgage ninja. He and I work very well together. We're connected through the Chamber of Commerce. We originally met about a year and a half ago through a client. I was representing him on the buy side, right? Ed was doing his loan, and I chatted with this guy. I'm like, man, this guy seems like he really knows what he's doing. And then we did something similar to this where we interviewed each other via Zoom, and like this
Nice.
actually it's a great way to meet different people in the industry, but they do different parts of it. Let's continue this going. So Daniel, I greatly appreciate you being on. I love what you do. Can you give me a high level overview, quick background of you, your education and your experience in estate planning?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I have a law firm here with partners in Walnut Creek, the East Bay of the San Francisco Bay Area. And the whole world of estate planning has been something that was just I was sort of brought up in it in a way. I came from a family of lawyers and farmers, actually, but both sides had been very astute and good planners. And ever since I was a kid, it was always talk of a trust. When I was 18, something my dad started saying, "You need to set up your trust. What are you doing?" I'm like, well, what is that? And then fast forward, I enjoyed trust and estates in law school, and then and basically set up my own planning a long time ago, and it was a very informative element to have my mom pass away and to have to deal with her trust and to go through that process to see how hard it can be. Even when it's done right, it's still a challenging process. It didn't involve probate, it was just a trust administration. But everything is very charged and emotional. And we even had a very compelling family drama when my grandparents died, because I realized that I'd been essentially cut out of their estate plan. And my family gathered around to bring me and my sister back in a way that you don't see. So it's just on an experiential level, I was had some just compelling experiences to draw from. And so when I got into formal estate planning by doing some essentially high level tax consulting for people approaching large scale liquidity events. And essentially what that entailed involved some of these really arcane kinds of trusts that can create tax efficiencies for people who are looking at things like estate taxes or large capital gains. And so I ended up coming into estate planning from like the farthest left field that you can imagine. But one day, 7 years ago, I was walking my dog in the park, a little puppy, and saw another puppy that looked a lot like mine. And I stopped the guy and I said, "Hey, tell me about your dog." And that was my now law partner, Jay. We had somehow, gotten dogs from the same litter off the same Craigslist ad. He happened to be a very smart CPA and estate planning attorney and worked for a great firm. And fast forward, he invited me to interview with them, I don't know, 6 or 7 years ago. And so I kind of got in at the ground floor working under these guys who I consider to be, red belts, people who've done it forever and who are just amazing at their practice. And so, yeah, I mean, that's sort of how it all started for me.
Wow. I appreciate that story. And by the way, when you said red belts, are you making a jujitsu reference, Daniel
Yeah,
Robert?
yeah, pretty much. Yeah,
Uh,
I came up doing starting jujitsu, Brazilian jiu-jitsu in college, and made it to purple belt before having to grow up and have kids. So hopefully, I'll be able to spend the time to eventually graduate, or at least I'm never going to be a red belt, right? And very few people are, but maybe someday I'll make black belt
yeah.
if I
Well, I
can.
recommendations for you as you've relocated to the East Bay. Once you're ready to get back on that saddle. And Ed, I don't know if you knew this. Yeah, Daniel and I really hit it off on that conversation, that initial one, because he did mention that he's been doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for a long time, and to be a purple belt, they don't just give those out.
Yeah, no,
Yeah,
it does, and it doesn't surprise me. I mean, birds of a feather flock together, right?
yeah, yeah. So he and I'm like, oh my god, I like this guy a lot. Just right when I heard that, so that really perked my interest. And
yeah.
I really appreciate you sharing that personal side of what led you down that path. I come from a family of immigrants similar to Ed. Ed moved to this country when he was about 6 months old. My parents are refugees from Iran. And the
Mm,
reason why I wanted, what real estate really stood out for me is the whole shelter aspect of it. My parents are
mm,
persona non grata, where they weren't wanted in their country, because when the Shah was overthrown, they fled and they came to America. And then, with the whole unfortunate hostage crisis that was going on, a lot of folks, were like, hey, go back to your country. They really didn't have one. And we
yeah,
started realizing just how important shelter is. And just, we talk about it when it comes to dollars and cents and equity and home appreciation and refinancing and all that jazz, right? But we got to really take a step back, I feel like, and just see how important it is to have shelter. So that's something that really makes me tick. And I know Ed has, a really similar story. So that's really interesting to hear. And I hear the gruesome process, Daniel, that happens. Let's say when people don't plan accordingly and they don't get an estate and they think, well, if I die, it'll go to my kids, and my wife will handle it, or something like that. Can you please share with me some of um the issues of having that type of mindset and thinking like that, and why they shouldn't be that way?
wait, could you clarify a bit? A mindset of
Yeah, like when they said, like, oh, I don't need to, properly plan my estate. Let's just say, you have a property, maybe a few rental properties. My wife will deal with it if when I pass. The kids will get it. She'll divvy it up that way, and
sure.
just have that type of mindset where they don't want to seek a proper estate planning
Yeah,
path.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah. What
yeah.
are the hurdles, I guess, the of thinking that way?
Sure. I mean, I heard a great quote, read a great quote that was something like, "You can ignore reality as long as you want, but at some point, you can't ignore the consequences of ignoring reality." Um, and so, you know, we're all going to die at some point, and relying on sort of the status quo to take care of things, yeah, it's going to be taken care of. I mean, everybody who dies, um, their stuff will go to other people one way or another. And so it really comes down to how deliberate do you want to be about your planning. Um, a lot of people just leave everything to their spouse, but if under the example that you just presented, you have a husband, I'm going to give everything to my wife. You're really taking a gamble on you dying first and her being responsible to deal with it. Um, and it presents all kinds of threats that people don't think about. Do I want all my stuff to go to my spouse and to my kids? It leaves open the possibility that if I die, I leave everything to my spouse. She could get remarried and leave everything to her spouse, and then my kids get nothing. So it's the kind of dynamic you have to sort of play. What are the permutations of this sort of choose your own adventure? What could eventually transpire that is not would not be in the interest of my family and my kids? And so you can ignore what's going to happen, but you have an opportunity right now to be very deliberate and thoughtful about how you want everything that you are, everything that you own, and even your own physical being, how you want that disposed of in the world. So I recommend going through this thought process, even if it's emotionally challenging.
Right. Nobody really wants to think that way, right? I'll be completely honest with you. Even Ed and I were sitting down once, and somebody from New York Life reached out to me, and it was more of one of those marketing ploys, like, "Hey, let's see how we can work together." I'm like, "Interesting. Maybe she has a lot of clients that look to buy or sell. Let's get on this call." And Ed and I were sitting there next to each other, and she started selling me life insurance. Like, I don't want to hear about this. Hey, how dare you? Go away. You know. And I took offense to it. And then afterwards, I looked at Ed. I'm like, "Ed, what do you think about that?" And he's like, to be honest with you, man, it's you should probably have it. It's important to have, right? And it just goes back to what you said, like the inevitable. Many times, especially when you hear it initially, it's you don't really want to think about that, right? But it's proper.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Well, and I think
yeah,
our brain really tricks us into thinking that it's farther down the line than it actually can be, right? We think it's that day is way out there, right? But if you put things in the context, let's bring it back into even the last 3 years. You guys know how much has happened in the last 3 years. We have COVID, we had millions of people die, we've experienced death. We have this crazy economy. We're going into 8% rates on mortgages. I mean, everything has flipped. Who would have ever thought that so much change would be crammed in the last 3 years? It's been nonstop. And guess what? Out of that, like personally, I've lost 20 people in the last 27, 28 months. I mean,
wow.
in a million years, I would have never ever thought that I would lose that many people in that short period of time, but it happens. So who's to say how much planning or lack of planning there was in that with all those people who died? And that's just a sample size of 20 people. But now let's bring and zoom out to the rest of the world in the country. Look, your the people that you claim to love may suffer for your lack of planning. That's one of the consequences that could be a reality here. I could tell you that I've had family members that passed away and didn't have anything in place, and by default they left their immediate families in a very horrible financial situation because they didn't take the time. And of course everybody's so busy, yet we fill stadiums to go watch football. You made the time to go park. You think about the process of buying tickets and going to the game. You buy the tickets, you got to go online, and then you got to pick a date, and then you got to go drive all the way over there. You got to find parking, and then you walk to the venue, you watch the whole thing, you coordinate beers and food, and then you reverse it going back home. That took a long time. That wasn't just showing up. Yet we make excuses on things that are super important, like estate planning. If you own a home, should you put that home in a trust? Most likely, yeah. But if you don't, look, if you're in California, chances of you getting sued are pretty high. Why? Because we're the most litigious state in the union. We sue people for everything. And guess what? I think lawsuits are going to fly even more. I'm going to tell you why. Because the disparity between the haves and have-nots has gotten so huge. Why do you think all the car break-ins? These people are looking for stuff to sell it, to resell. Look at eBay and look at all the stolen stuff that is sold on Craigslist and eBay. It's a huge problem, guys. And I think it's just because it's really symptomatic of where we're at as a society. And we're going to see more violence. We're going to see, and I'm not just bringing negativity here. The positive news of this is you can do something about it. Do it before life dictates, because something's going to happen. Like you said, Daniel, whether you like it or not, we're all dying, and like it or not, somebody's getting your stuff. Now the question is your intentionality. And
Right.
that's where somebody like Daniel comes in to help you with that intentionality. And it doesn't take as long or as much money as you think.
Oh
It
yeah,
doesn't.
for sure. And to add to your point, I mean, I think that a lot of people, there's a lot of deeper questions than, who gets my stuff and in what allocations. Because ideally we want to be able to think about everything that we're conveying. Are we giving are we setting ourselves up in such a way that we're imparting our values to our kids, right? Are we giving, am I giving my 18-year-old high school graduate, $5 million to just have, and hopefully they'll be responsible with it? Am I going to try to protect it in a way? What if I have a drug addicted kid or someone I know who's just incredibly, financially irresponsible? There are options for protecting them from themselves. There are options for protecting my family money from my daughter's first or second spouse if I do it properly. I think of the biggest risks to preserving family wealth as being, divorce is a huge one. We all know how expensive it is to get divorced, but if you have money structured properly, a divorce isn't really going to change how the money that I create for my descendants is going to still be there to protect them. You also have to think about healthcare costs, long-term care. If I get hurt, what are the things that, how much is it going to cost? If it's going to cost something like $20,000 a month, how long can I sustain that on my own? And sure, there's a lawsuits, and that is definitely something to think about, primarily for entrepreneurs and business owners. But it's also something that can be insured against for the most part, right? So these are all things that you need to incorporate to design how you want your legacy to be protected.
Man, well said. Yeah, and as you were talking, I was thinking about wills. I was thinking about trusts, and I was thinking a hypothetical if somebody said, "Oh, yeah, I'm planning on writing up a will, and I'm going to have a notary public, right, notarize it, and that's the route I'm willing to go." I'm curious to get your take on the difference between wills and trusts, and when to
Yeah.
use them, and how that's beneficial.
Okay, so they dovetail very closely, and in some states, estate planning attorneys focus on wills, and I'm not sure I still am not certain why, because you can do anything you want with a will. You can create trusts that spring out of a will to do anything you want, but it's really that all has to be done through a court procedure called probate, which is prolonged, it's expensive, and it's public. So if you don't want it, an administration always takes a long time no matter what, but you can avoid a lot of the expense and the public nature of a court proceeding by setting up a trust. So a will is just a set of directions that has to be administered in court. And a trust is a set of instructions that avoids probate and allows assets to pass to whomever you want without having to go through that court procedure called probate. Yeah, I'll leave it at that. Just let that sink in for a second.
Helping our clients do those probate sales, yeah, it could definitely be a fairly gruesome process. I've definitely dealt with that a lot for clients, and just to go in the back and forth, and I see how sometimes heirs can get pretty nasty with one another sometimes.
Yeah, right. Oh yeah, for sure.
And one is happy with the sales price and the other one isn't, and so on and so forth, and they're in different parts of the country, and sometimes in different countries, and getting everybody on board is definitely gonna be a pretty challenging thing. You had mentioned taxes.
Mm-hmm.
Curious about estate taxes, and
okay.
around what you do. Can you give us in layman's terms, give us a high level overview of that?
Sure. Yeah. So the estate tax is one element of what they call the unified credit. And it actually incorporates multiple taxes. You've heard of gift taxing and generation skipping, transfer tax. they're all kind of wrapped up into the same thing. And I feel like it's a discussion for most people that is only, like, we only really know about it because in the years when we were a lot younger, 20 years ago, 2001, the estate tax exemption, meaning the amount of money that they let you pass on for free without taxing it at 40%, was $675,000. That number is now 12.92 million per person. So if you're married, there's a lot of people who have a net worth of over 25 million, but most of us are within that threshold. And so we don't need to think about really fancy estate tax planning unless you're kind of in my world and a lot of these people who are dealing with that kind of thing. But yeah, I mean, the estate tax is it's really just the amount of money. It's really just a tax over the exemption amount that you die owning and want to pass on. There are ways to avoid the estate tax. You could gift to charity and doing any number of different kinds of strategies before you die to kind of minimize the impact of what that will look like down the road. But it involves things like making substantial gifts now. And the estate tax exemption, 12.92, is going to roll back in 2026 to about 7 million or so. So that number is going to be significantly less, but it's still a fair chunk of change that you can die passing on to your kids that's technically within your estate. But so that being said, there's actually several different kinds of taxes that should be calculated sort of together as you're thinking about it. Because if you die with, say, a lot of capital gains, for the most part, if you die owning it, you're going to get a step up, and your kids are not going to have to pay capital gains on that if they want to sell it after you die. That, coupled with property tax issues like we've seen since Prop 19 passed, it's a lot harder to pass on a lot of value in terms of the amount you pay to your county on properties you own. It's a lot harder to keep those amounts low than it was before 2020, 2021, I think, just a couple years ago. So estate tax, yes, it's an element, but it really is sort of in an ecosystem of tax that ought to be thought of in terms of sort of collective efficiency. How can you look at all these different factors and minimize how much you're going to pay down the road?
Oh, okay. I see. And if somebody came to you, let's say myself, true story, property's not in a trust right now, and they wanted to put said property in trust, what type of documents would they have to bring your way in order to do this?
It's funny. In California, there's something called you can have a verbal trust. So in theory, you can just say, I want to put this in trust, and basically state the name. But yeah, nobody does that, even though it's a part of the law. So I mean, when we're starting a foundational estate plan, we set up what's called a revocable living trust, which is a trust. I like to think of it as instructions you might leave a babysitter, right? These are the instructions. You don't actually own it. You don't own my child and everything that I have, but these are the instructions, and I want you to go off and handle them according to the instructions. So that's basically what a trust is. It's an agreement and a set of instructions about what to do. So if we were trying to set this up for somebody, we look at what they want to do, set up a trust, have it signed, execute it, and then set up a will that goes alongside it, saying everything that would be in my estate that would be subject to probate is actually really going to fall or over into this trust, and under the trust document. But if we have the Nima Revocable Living Trust dated August 25th, 2023, we'd have a document that says that. And then it's easy enough for you, Nima, to be able to, we write up a deed that says I'm transferring my property to this trust, and that then funds the trust itself. The property is then subject to the trust, and if you die, we're good. I mean, we have to go through the process of recording it with the county, making it official, but it's not that much harder than what I just described.
Okay. So if right now I have like for me personally, I have a few accounts with Merrill Lynch, right? Whether they're 29 accounts, your SEP IRA accounts, things like that. You as an estate planning attorney, do you work with folks like that? In that realm, like do you work closely with financial professionals in your line of work?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think people don't talk about it that much, but I think it's absolutely imperative to have a strong financial planner be part of the team that you set up for how you want all your assets arranged. Usually, a good financial planner will basically be the quarterback. They're going to lead the team. They sort of have control of your assets. They know what you want to do. They know how you want to build it. And so it ends up being that sort of the usually the top three, depending on the dynamic, is a financial professional, an advisor, an estate planning attorney, and a CPA. You want your estate lined up. You also want your taxes lined up on a year-by-year basis. And then the sort of the other parts of the team would be as any situation demands. If I'm a heavy-duty real estate investor, a lot of my wealth is tied up in real estate. I'm gonna have somebody like you. You're gonna be my right-hand man, keeping track of the markets, keeping track of, and Ed, keeping track of lending opportunities, that kind of thing. And so there's a lot of people who end up working closely with you on an ongoing basis. And so you'd be part of that team as well. But you definitely need to have a team and have the people as part of your team communicate within each other or with each other, consistently.
To that point, I don't know if you guys remember, one of the things that I do after I fund a loan for every client is I do and schedule what's called a post-funding meeting. And in that post-funding meeting, we zoom out and go 30,000 feet up to talk about the whole financial situation. And I do that because it's imperative that everyone have a team. And in that team are the people that you mentioned, Daniel. You need to have a really great tax person that you have a relationship with. Not that they just do your taxes, but that they also give you tax advice, right? Because they have their finger on that tax legislation and changes pulse. The second person, you should definitely have an estate planning attorney, because you're going to want to avoid all these pains we just talked about. And how do you do that? By creating a trust, putting your property into the trust, having your wills, your advanced medical directives, right? Your POAs, your power of attorneys, all those things that are important, because there's so many decisions that you haven't thought about right now that others will need to make, that you're already making subconsciously because you're still alive. But when you're not alive, those are going to have to be done by somebody. Things that you don't think about, like think about all of your passwords, all the things you have, all your accounts. I mean, where's that at? Do you have a document with all that stuff? What happens if you die right now? Nobody can even have access to your stuff. You just made it 1,000 times more difficult to your spouse and your kids, right? As an example. But you should also have, like you said, Daniel, quarterback. Your financial quarterback is your financial advisor. And they're not all created equal. There's some of them that are only peddling life insurance. That's not a financial planner. Okay, somebody who can create a comprehensive plan based on your risk tolerance, the amount of time, based on mortality tables that you have left over, right, between now and death, and all your assets, and taking into consideration your family setup, meaning how many kids and who do you want to be in charge of what, a good financial planner is going to help quarterback all those things. And you should absolutely have that in place, because if you don't, guess what? The government's going to make that decision for you. Somebody will, but you don't want the government to make that decision. You want to make that decision. And that's why it's important to have all this stuff set up.
Yeah, totally. And just a point about life insurance, I'm a huge advocate of life insurance. It's really important. And especially not just for, you know, an amount of money I want my kids to have if I die, so that they're kind of taken care of with a cash payout right away. It's also like if I'm in a real estate partnership or a business partnership, you want to employ life insurance strategies at the company level, so that if I die, it ensures that perhaps my wife and kids don't have to be in bed with my law partner forever. There's a, you know, that you want to create those liquidity options, and life insurance can be a huge part of that. So I'm an advocate, and I think there's a lot of value there.
Yeah, for the record, I am too. And keep in mind, folks, when you pass away and you have life insurance, that goes tax-free. They don't pay any taxes on it. So don't only leave your loved ones by losing you, but also losing everything that you work so hard for because they can't afford it. Don't do that.
Well, that means I got to change my I got to get on that and reach out to my State Farm agent, because she's been reaching out to me. I have, you know, like, hey, come on, you got your home and auto going. We got to add this last piece, and I keep putting it off.
Yeah, and I want to hear back. You know what? I'm actually a client of theirs as well, but not for life insurance. So I don't even know what they do on that front. You may need to, you know, depending on how you want to structure things, you may need to look at other options as well.
Yeah, definitely. And you guys had mentioned kids before, right? When we're talking about life insurance, or even heirs with respect to estate planning.
Yeah.
You know, in your line of work, because, you know, being mindful of different cultures, sometimes they say, from what I hear, that at times everything goes to the oldest boy or oldest, you know, child, whatever the case may be, right? Maybe some parents play favoritism. Do you deal with these types of things, like conflicts that occur during this process amongst the heirs?
It can get so tense.
Yeah.
Yeah, it can get so tense. So I mean, every family is unique, and every family has drama and complexity. And if you know that there's going to be kind of disparities between your kids, for instance, as to, you know, how you want to give them their assets, it makes sense, first of all, to think through and not do something off the cuff, right? You don't want to do something spontaneously. Sometimes it just doesn't make any sense to say, hey, I want each of my 3 kids to have an equal percentage.
Yeah.
And it's fine. There's a lot of times where we say, okay, this person only gets 5% of your estate. It's because they made $500 million last year. They don't need it. Whereas, you know, my daughter's a teacher and she doesn't have that much money. It can make a lot of sense, but it also, the emotional side is really, can be really critical. So it pays to have these conversations beforehand. If you can get kids buy-in, or at least convey your why. You know, why are you doing something? So at least it's not a mystery to them. They understand where you're coming from, that this is the reasoning behind the course you took in making an unequal distribution. You know, at the same time, you know, at least I want to say 60% of the time when I've got families with more than 2 kids, there's one who's not very financially savvy. And so dealing with that kid for their own benefit, you might want to keep money in trust for a long time. Who do you name to control that trust? that's going to, dole out money for their long-term benefit. It doesn't allow them to just go spend it all. And if one of the possible contenders for a trustee you'd name to take care of their own siblings' trust is a sibling, you really got to think through the consequences. Is it going to create massive conflict, at your children's generation? And ideally you want to avoid that by good planning before the fact. After somebody dies, there may be no way to deal with it. So, that's when I've got a few cases right now where we're having to litigate because we have a jilted son who's really unhappy with how things played out, with with the way that the money was distributed in trust, and he's not available for him, and he's unhappy about it, didn't get as much.
Right.
Those are all kinds of things that you have to fight about at the end, which is very, very expensive. And sometimes it's unavoidable, but to the extent that you can employ good planning before the fact, you want to make every effort for the benefit of everyone involved.
Yeah.
It's a lot of drama.
Makes total sense. So in closing, Daniel, what are like 3 things that you could tell people who are watching this that are just initial ways just to start this dialogue? What are some steps that they can be taking if they own any kind of assets?
What are the first steps? I mean, you need to think about what you have. What do you have and what do you want to pass on? Are they hard assets? Do you want to find a way to preserve hard assets for the family? Look at your kids. What are the things that they would want to, you want them to have either individually or collectively? Do you want to give them the options to create liquidity after you die? Do that calculus. And really it's think about, what are your whys? Why do you want to make a certain decision for your kids? If it's a huge amount of money, are you going to mess your kids up by giving it to them outright? What are your other options? Do you want to look at things like charitable giving to create a charitable legacy as well? What are those whys? And also it shouldn't come just from one person. Ideally, get input, talk to your family, ask them what you think, what they potentially want down the road from you and your legacy. How can you convey that you love your kids, love your family, and in a way that people are not going to be embittered about it? Death is always hard. How can we minimize the drama around it? And
emotional collateral damage.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's a good way of putting it.
Yeah, exactly. So that wasn't a succinct 3 parts.
No, it's great advice, man. I think especially that why. I mean, look, the why drives us, right? So let it drive also this process. And I'm just going to give him the next step, which is you need to contact Daniel, because Daniel's been in the game a long.
Oh, went to mute.
You want to mute? Yeah. Anyway,
yeah, it seems like you have been in the
He's a guy here to help you. Give him a call. You see his information there. Send him an email. You will be absolutely happy that you did, because you're going to discuss things that you haven't thought about. I promise.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Ed. Yeah, and I'm always happy to be a resource.
I'm going to include your information, Daniel, in the show notes and on the YouTube channel as well, in the comment section, in case folks are interested. They will be able to, find your information and reach out. And full disclosure, I might be doing that sometime soon as well to you. Like, just again, when I had you on, this was a genuine curiosity that I had for my own self, and I thought, hey, if I can benefit from it, somebody who's been in the real estate industry for many years, other people who don't have that much knowledge can also most likely benefit from this, unless they've already gone through it. So we really appreciate having you on. And I'm grateful to have you as a contact now for anybody who would inquire about something like that. Now I have my
Absolutely.
for this. So yeah, we appreciate you
Excellent.
jumping on with us.
Yeah,
today.
thank you, Daniel.
My
Always a
pleasure.
pleasure.
You guys have been great. Really good to spend some time with you, Nima and Ed, and I appreciate you both.
Sounds good.
Thanks a lot.
All right. Well, you guys have a fantastic day. Thanks again. And by the way, everybody, look out for our next videos because they're coming.
Yeah, they're coming up soon. That's How's the Market podcast, and we have our video podcast going as well. And I appreciate you guys, and hope you both have a great rest of your week and weekend.
Thank you. You as well.
All right.
Thanks a lot. Thank you, Nima.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.